Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint this little spooky still life. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials for today's painting, as well as for the tracing element for all the pieces in this painting. Also in the video description below, you'll find a link to my website where I've got some information on our Halloween marathon, so make sure you check that out. You can also just go to paintingwithjane.com. Now let's get started. Okay, today I am starting with my 6x6 inch Frederick's Red Label canvas again, and I've already prepared it and gotten it ready for our video today. So to prepare this canvas, I painted the whole thing black, and then I put a coat of matte medium over the top, just because I've noticed that chalk, at least the chalk I use, tends to stick to paint, so that's not necessary if you don't feel like you need it. I printed out my image, which you can print. There's a link in the video description below to where you can download this image for free. And what I did was line it up. See this line at the base here? I lined it up with the base of my canvas to make sure it was even and in the right place. I colored on the back of the paper with a little bit of white chalk, and then lightly with a pen drew over these lines so that I get my image there. I am going to take an eraser and just lightly run over my lines, because sometimes if you get a little bit of paint on top of them, it kind of locks the chalk in and then it doesn't want to come out. So I'm just going to lighten it a bit, especially on the glass. So the candle holder here, so I'm erasing it, but it's not coming off completely. I'm going to really lighten those lines because that can totally change the look of my glass. I think like the book and the skull, they're probably fine, but I know I have a hard time when the chalk shows really strongly against this glass. And these are my General's chalk pencils. I get asked about them a ton, so if you're interested in them, there is an affiliate link in the video description below to Amazon where you can get these, and they are really nice to use. I struggled for a long time to find something I like to draw on canvas with until I found these. Now for the most part in this painting, I'm going to be using my 1/4 inch angle brush. Now if you're not comfortable doing a whole painting with a little angle brush, that's perfectly okay. Use whatever you're comfortable with. You don't have to use this just because I am. So I'm going to take my 1/4 inch and I'm going to wet it in my jar and wipe it off on the edge a bit. Now on my plate, I've got some Mars Black, which is basics, and titanium white, which is also basics. Some unbleached titanium, which is heavy body. It's really just an off-white. So if you can't find this color in particular, just look for an off-white, or you can just mix a little brown in some white to make it. But I do think it's an important color for this painting. So I'm going to pull out just a little bit of it. And a tiny speck of black. I just want kind of a neutralized gray color. See that? I'm going to come in here to my candle, and I'm just going to work kind of loose. Don't get too crazy with this. We want this to be kind of a quick painting, so just, you know, generally get that color on there. It's okay if some of that black shows. That's why we used a black canvas in the first place. So I'm going to mix a little more black into it. So I don't want it to be pure black, but I want a very dark gray. See, very, very dark. And let's take that down this back side. See how I'm just lightly bringing it over top of that first color. Don't worry if your candle's not straight. It's an old half melted candle. It's probably a little bit wobbly and melted. A little more of my light color. Let's get a bit of some lighter color up here. A little thicker. Kind of daub it on there. It's okay if we get some texture. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Kind of put a little pressure and get some lines in there that almost look like melted wax. Let's take just a hint of that down the edge. So I'm really only picking up the unbleached now, but there's still a little gray in there, so it's not pure. I'm going to use the corner of my angle. I know I usually tell you not to use the corner of your angle, not to go against the angle, But that's one of the nice things about using just a small angle for this whole painting, is I can use that corner, and it's almost like using a different brush. I'm just gonna pull a little bit of that down. Just some little melty bits. A little bit of a darker color. So this is a pretty simple painting, I think. It's just mostly about giving yourself time to spend on it. See how I keep rolling my brush over and just using the tip? So it's almost like I'm also using a round, but I'm not. It's just my angle. Now, while I have these colors on my brush, I'm going to go to my skull because I'm really going to use the same colors on the skull as I did in the candle. So I'm going to mix up a gray color. Just kind of a nice middle of the road color. See, it's substantially lighter than the black, but it's substantially darker than the unbleached. Keep a little water in your brush if you feel like you need it. I'm using very light pressure, just going around the edge. I'm not going to go all the way back. Notice on our reference image that really the majority of the light is right here in the front. Toward the back, there's very little light. That's going to give it a really dramatic look. Use the edge of my angle to get around that eye. Try not to think of it as a skull or as any, specific shape as you're going. What I want you to do instead is to, look at your reference image while you go and think, okay, I have this color that's roughly in this type of a shape right there. And kind of pay attention to how each color works in relation to the other colors. See, light pressure, see that pressure? How it's just breaking up that line so it's not a hard line. It's just a little bit fuzzier, but I still have quite a bit of paint on here. If I were to put heavy pressure, I'd get a lot of paint down onto my canvas, and I don't want to do that. So just some light pressure, kind of dusting it. All I'm really saying right now is where I want my light, where I want the light source to be hitting my skull. I know that this is nowhere near the color that I want just yet. So right there on the front of the teeth, and a little bit more over here. Kind of dust it up to the edge of the nose there. If your highlights are too intense in any one place, really don't worry about that. Again, that's part of the joy of painting on black is, I don't know, to me it seems so much, I feel so much freer to be able to say, oh, that's all right, I'll just paint it over with black later. You'd think that if you're working on a white canvas, you would think, oh, I'll just paint it over with white later, but somehow it works more with black than it does with white or any other color. Got a little dust of highlight right there. And if you notice in our image, there is a highlight around the back, right here. And I think this color I'm using is a little bit too light for that area, but again, I'm not worried about it right now, because this is really all just a placeholder to remind myself what's light and what's dark. And we'll just put a little indication on the teeth. Nothing too specific, again, just crushing the corner of my angle brush into there. Keep a little water on your brush if you like. While I'm painting like this, I do like to use a drier brush. So I get a little bit of water, the tiniest bit, only every so often. I just got the tiniest bit for the first time since I started the skull. So I mixed up a very slightly darker color. Now I'm gonna just kind of start breaking them. Oh, that's not dark enough. Let's go a little bit darker. There, we're gonna go very dark. It's almost black, but it's a little gray. Start dusting that in to the dark area here. See my pressure? I'm really going like this. Let's see, can you see how my brush is hitting the palette? That's how my brush is moving. I am not doing that. See how much paint I have on there? I'm doing that. Little brush strokes, kind of cross-hatching. I can overlap. Since I'm cross-hatching, it's almost like a dry brushing technique. So a lot of that color that I put down in the first place is gonna stay showing. If I don't want it to show, then I can use heavier pressure to really cover it up. Letting quite a bit of that black show right there. If you use too much paint here, you're just going to be painting over everything every time you touch the brush to the canvas. So see how much paint I'm using? That's a very thin spread of paint. See that? No globs. And let's continue laying in our shadows. Oh, that somehow was lighter. There we go. I didn't take my highlight over far enough on the nose there, but that's all right. I'll fix that up in a minute. Remember, we've got this little shadow right here under the nose. Always the lightest pressure possible. Right in here, I feel like that's all going to be black, so I'm really just going to leave that, at least for now. I may come back later and change my mind. Don't forget, inside of the eye sockets, there is a very dark gray, just right there. Right there. If it's easier for you to just fill in that whole eye socket rather than worry about how far in you're taking it, that's okay, because you can come back later with some black and cover it up. I'm hoping you can see that color. I know it's super dark. And there's a little bit inside of the nose as well. Just all on the left side. Now let's get some black, just black, and we can dust back any of that was too strong or went too far, got in the wrong place, whatever. Always that light pressure. I think our skull is looking pretty good. Okay, I just wiped off some of that black. I'm gonna go back into my unbleached titanium. I picked up a little bit more. See how light this color is? We're gonna start really bumping our highlights. Let's start again on this brightest area of the skull. You can put a little heavier pressure there to really lay down some of that paint, and then up on the tip of your brush to dust it out and break it up. Keep this edge here very crisp. That's going to be a huge point of contrast, you know, where the brightest part of the skull meets the darkest part of the background. So that's really where your attention is going to be drawn. So you want a nice sharp line there. Start bringing that down the nose a bit. Again, I have not picked up more water. My brush is very dry. Very, very dry. Just keep that reference image. And like I said, don't worry about, you know, trying to make the skull look like a skull. Just look at it and say, okay, in my reference image, I see a bright highlight right here, a bright color there. So put a bright color there on your image. That's all this is. I think I actually need to change the shape of my nose just a little bit. Let's try that. So see, I pulled it over into the eye a bit. And I'm gonna get some black, get that dark gray color. And I'm gonna pull the shape out just a little. There we go. And a little black, because I think I pulled that too far. See, it's so easy to make corrections, you guys. So please don't be, nervous or worried. I would say the most important thing here that's really going to be the difference between, you having an easy time painting this and having a difficult time is the amount of pressure that you put on your brush. If you're putting way too much pressure, see, my brush is not bending, then you're going to deposit way too much paint and struggle. And I don't want you to struggle. So put your hand on your canvas if you need to. And get nice and light pressure. We're kind of bright right here. Pull that down this way a bit. I think the skull is the most involved part of this whole painting. So once we get done with the skull, we are pretty close to being done. Nice and bright right there. I think the two most eye-catching parts of this painting are going to be the top of the skull's head up here and this part of the jaw or the mouth right there. So we want to make sure those are nice and bright. Still using that same mixture, just very dry. All right, let's get just unbleached. See the difference between that color and that color there? Quite a bit. This is going to be much brighter. And just focus it where he's going to be the brightest. I know it's going to feel strange. Sometimes when we're not used to adding a lot of contrast, going very dark or going very light, it's really hard to make yourself go as light as you really need to go. But don't be intimidated. Just go for it. If it's too light, you can darken it. It's not the end of the world. Dust, dust, dust. Bright. I went a little brighter here than in my image because I felt like that looked interesting. And you can make those decisions as you go too. If something doesn't look right in your image, don't do it. Or do it your own way. Bright, right there. Lay it down and dust it over. Nice and bright, but not quite as bright. Right here under this eye. And now let's grab some white. Just mixing it lightly with what's left of that unbleached on my brush. And we're really just gonna punch a couple areas that are super bright. Now sometimes your paint, if it gets thick, you can start lifting it as you add layers. If you're feeling like your paint's gonna start lifting, just let it dry, come back to it. Just like I did on the candle. I just kind of walked away from it for a minute. Nice and bright right there. I haven't been paying attention to my teeth. Just the slightest hint of white right in there. Let's use the corner and see, I'm not worrying about making real specific teeth. and it gets darker as it comes over here. I'm just gonna get another dark gray and just kind of make little adjustments to any of my shadows or highlights that I felt like were off. And then I think we can move on. I feel like I'm pretty happy with the skull. I kind of lost my shadow right in here. It's nice dark, dust it over. I don't feel like it needs too much adjustment. Just darken up these teeth on this side a little. And maybe just a little hint of white in these front ones. It's all very impressionist, you know? Just kind of, you put a little dollop of one color somewhere and it tells you what you're seeing. You know, you don't have to give all pieces of information for it to be effective. You just kind of say, here's a shadow here, and that's gonna tell the viewer that that's a recessed part of the skull. All right, I promise I'm about done fiddling with my skull. But don't be afraid to take the time to make adjustments. Sometimes I kind of hurry through adjustments or I skip them just because I don't want you to get bored watching me, you know, adjust the same thing over and over. But there's really nothing wrong with it. You know, you can do the same thing over and over and over again. Just because it looks like I get it right or as right as possible in the first, you know, adjustment or two doesn't mean that I really do. I didn't get that as bright as I want. I think I'm going to come back to that. That paint is pretty thick. Let's go work on our candle for a bit. All right, so some bright unbleached. Good amount. Get some nice bright. There we go. See, now that my candle's a little bit drier, that color is showing up better. Nice and bright up there. Bright little drips of wax coming down the edge. You could do your candle in, you know, a different color if you like. I went with the same colors in the image because I felt like that had the best contrast. I feel like if my candle were red, it might take away from my skull too much. And some white. And I definitely wanted my skull to be the, you know, the focal point of the painting. You can even put little daubs of that brighter color there. And again, just with that medium gray, just to touch it up. Just making little adjustments. And then that weird spot where I wiped my paint and it got away from me, I cleaned off my brush. Just grabbed a little black and I'll just cover right over it. No big deal. All right, I let my skull dry for a bit and my brush is clean and slightly damp. I'm just gonna bump those highlights and then we really are gonna move on from the skull. I just wanna make sure that my candle isn't brighter than the brightest parts of the skull. So that is just unbleached, pure unbleached. Just felt like it wasn't quite bright enough on the top of his head there, the bridge of his nose. This edge of his eye, and obviously right there. A little bit of white, maybe a little bit more white than that. There we go. I feel like that is looking much better, much closer to what I was wanting. You can always go back, like I said, with a little bit of black to clean up the shape if it gets away from you. Okay, that's what we have so far. Let's go ahead and start working on the book. All right, now I have some burnt umber and raw sienna, both in heavy body. Now I do not need that much raw sienna, but my tube of raw sienna exploded, and that's what came out. So I'm gonna get some burnt umber, still using my 1/4 inch angle. Good amount of burnt umber. I'm just gonna pull in a little bit of raw sienna. I feel like this is a nice leather color. I really like this color. All right, I'm gonna start with the top of my book because it's gonna be very simple. We're not gonna spend a lot of time up here. I'm gonna make that line and then dust it back. Just let it fade into that black. All across here. You can go right up to your teeth, and this is where you can reshape them. So if you had a tooth that got away from you, cover it up. Just dust that back until the brown disappears. There we go. In fact, I'm gonna throw just a hint more raw sienna in there, particularly up front. There. Now I'm just picking up raw sienna. I still have the burnt umber on my brush. I didn't clean my brush off. And just with these quick little downward strokes right here on the edge of the book cover, along the spine, and on this edge. I like to do it this way rather than this way, because going this way kind of makes it very, very smooth. And it's an old book. I want it to seem like a very ancient book. So when I do it like that, I get a bit of a more jagged line, and that's what I want. A little more raw sienna. I'm gonna start right here on each of these, maybe a little bit farther on the top one. I'm gonna wipe some of that off and get my burnt umber. I'm gonna start where I overlap that and work into it. Very light pressure. See, my brush isn't bending at all. And start working that back. Stop right about there. Again, start on top of that raw sienna. Work forward a bit and back. Wipe that off a bit and a little bit of black. I'm going to start back here on top of the burnt umber and very gently, very light pressure, work forward. Same down here. We want this to disappear into the shadow. Just completely disappear. Don't worry about the white line. We'll take care of that later. Okay, I cleaned off my brush because I didn't want to take any black to the next part. I'm going to get some more of that raw sienna and a little bit of my unbleached titanium. Same thing, just kind of down on this edge. It doesn't have to cover the whole edge. See, I'm kind of pulling it in little brush strokes over to the side. We might just give it a very slight flavor of this lighter color there. Not much. I'm gonna go into just the unbleached. Still have that color on. And let's get a nice bright highlight right on this edge. Let's keep those corners on the front bright because that helps say where it switches to the side. All right, well, we have some unbleached. Let's just go straight into that. And in fact, I got a little bit of yellow oxide too. So I'm going to grab some yellow oxide and mix it with some unbleached. And of course that raw sienna is still on my brush. And a tiny bit of black, not that much black. We're going to get kind of a yellowy gray color. Look like old parchment paper or something. Let's start there and see how that goes. Not too bad. It's pretty close. And I'm going to take all my brush strokes here side to side like that, but in these short jerky motions. Because again, these pages, even in our reference image, the pages are kind of, you know, falling out and they're not real straight and even. And just kind of jaggedly stop where that corner is. Let's throw a little more black in there. So it's a very, very dark color. And we're gonna make some of those little shadow lines in there. Just kind of add them where you feel like you'd like to see them. Certainly up here at the top. Just gonna wipe my brush off a bit. And let's just get some, and let's just get some unbleached. And light pressure again. That's pretty wet and thick. We may let that dry and come back to it. Let's work down the side. Kind of follow that line. If it angles up, angle your pages up. Again, I'm not taking it all the way back. Let's get a little bit of this yellow in there. Maybe we'll throw a little more raw sienna and even some burnt umber. Just mix your colors until you get just a darker color, something pleasing. I'm even going to throw a hint of black in there. There we go. That's about what I was looking for. A little bit more black. We'll get some nice dark bits in here. Get it to start kind of blending down the back of the pages. Because you don't really want to see a line just where that color just stops. Kind of fade it back with some black. All right, almost done with the book. A little bit of this yellow oxide. Good amount of our unbleached titanium, a nice bright color. We're gonna use very conservatively, so don't have globs on here. And very light pressure. Just barely scratch some of that in, particularly here, where the corners meet. If it's too bright, that's okay. I just added the tiniest hint of black to it. You know, it's okay if it's too bright because just like the skull and the candle, you can leave them and come back and rework them. Tiny speck of just unbleached. Oh, that's what I like. I saw that little blip of unbleached right there. Perfect. Yep, that's what I wanted. Sometimes you don't know what you want until you have it. Do something and you think, oh, that's exactly it. One last thing, and then we are done with the book. I'm just picking up black. I wiped my brush off on my plate. Just picking up a little black. And we're gonna throw in a little bit of a shadow right there at the spine. As you can tell, I kind of simplified the hourglass a little bit. So you could do it just like the image if you like. So I cleaned off my brush because I don't want any black on there. And I'm going to start with my yellow oxide. We're going to do our best to make this hourglass look like brass. So starting on this top edge, just pull that straight down. I'm more worried about the shape I get on the top than taking it all the way to the bottom of the shape. Let it kind of fizzle out back there. Now I can come from the bottom and make sure that that's filled in. And I'll let that start to fizzle out. Let's do the same thing here on the base. And on these little, I don't know, standy-uppy bits. Hourglass handles, whatever they are. Whoops, I got way out of my line there. That's all right. Not a big deal. Take the corner of my angle brush and I'm really just going to kind of mush a little highlight onto the front part of that ball. I'm probably just going to leave the back half of the ball black, and then when I remove the chalk line, there won't be anything over there, but your brain will still understand what it's looking at. I'm going to go into my burnt umber. Again, I did not clean the yellow oxide off. Let's start right here on top of the yellow oxide and very lightly bring it down over top. That paint's kind of drying a bit, so maybe I'll just grab a little raw sienna, tiny bit. And maybe a little more yellow oxide. I think that looks pretty good so far. We'll skip the burnt umber down here. Just get a little raw sienna, a little yellow oxide. Let's go back into our burnt umber and we'll darken up the back of these. What did we decide to call them? Standy-uppy bits. This one back here, I'm mostly going to fill in with the burnt umber. Very little over here. I'm going to take off that bright highlight from the very top. I don't want to have bright highlight up at the top there, because underneath here, I'm really just going to dash on a hint of this burnt umber, just right underneath, just so it's not pure black, but I really don't want to pay attention to it or see it either. Grab a little bit of raw sienna, and I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm just giving a hint of that color on the base plate there. See, super easy, super simple. Just pretend like it's there. Pretend like you can see it. That's really all we need. We don't need to be real specific. Just wipe my brush off on my plate. I'm gonna get some yellow oxide, some unbleached titanium, get a nice bright goldy color. And let's just give a hint of a highlight in just a few places. Take the corner of our brush, a little bright spot on the front of these little decorative pieces. Get it down the edge here. Don't want it up at the very top, so let it go away there. Just a hint of it here. Not much. One last little bit of just unbleached. To just really pop the bright parts. Anything that's bright in this painting, I want it to be very bright. You know, where we've got a black background, we really have the opportunity to play with some high contrast, and That's what was so fun about this painting to me. I mean, aside from the fact that it's a fun Halloween painting, I really liked all of the contrast in it. Cleaned off my brush and just got a little black, and let's just fix up that line. See, so simple. All right, let's start highlighting our glass. Now I'm gonna do this as simply as possible. Pay attention, in our reference photo, we have, you know, kind of a bright edge coming down the left, and there's ever so slightly a bright edge coming down the right. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of unbleached and I'm gonna mix it over here with a tiny, tiny speck of black. So I get a kind of a light gray. I'm just gonna start there on the edge, bring that down. See how faint that is? We'll take it here too. And I did kind of change the shape of the candle holder a bit. Let's give it a bit of a bright highlight at the bottom edge here. Remembering that we can always take care of anything we don't like, we'll just paint it out with some black. Now that this paint is almost gone, let's just give the slightest bit of it down this side, and it doesn't even have to cover the whole edge. You know, key points. So maybe right here to say it's moving that way, and then maybe right there to say it curves back in and nothing else. This white line is the chalk and it will be gone. Let's get a hint of white. Just a hint. We're using almost no paint here. Don't use too much paint. Let's see, we've got a little bit of a bright pop right there. A little bit right in here. A little bit more unbleached, because right here is kind of where our biggest reflection is. I'm just following the shape of the glass, and then it curves right there. You could really leave it like that if you like. You know, put as much or as little into this as you want. That had just a bit more white in it. We'll give just a little bright spot there. And just kind of scratch a hint into there. I feel like I might be done with that glass. I'm going to get a little point of white and just kind of brighten up the wax that's dripping off right there. So let's move on to the glass in our hourglass. Notice on our reference image, the top half of the hourglass has very little light in it. I'm going to take this little white unbleached mixture that I have. We've got a bit of a bright spot kind of right in here. Go with a little bit more unbleached. We've got a little spot in there. Kind of a bright edge down this side. And brighter, whiter one here. Make sure that you're following the shape that the glass goes. Add a little bright point in there. I just picked up a little pinpoint of white. And let's get a dark gray color. Doesn't matter if you use white or unbleached, just get a dark gray color. A color you'll see against the black, but just barely. And maybe we'll just dust a bit of that into here. Just a bit. Down this edge. One more bright pop right here, and I feel like we're done. With the hourglass anyway. We have one more spot, one more thing to do, and this next thing is quite simple. All right, I lied. We actually have one other thing besides this, but it's seriously fast. So I have some deep violet here, and this is heavy body. It really doesn't matter. I'm gonna grab a little speck of black, mix it in until it's mostly violet, but I can still see that it's darkened a bit. What I'm going for is a very dusty mauve. A little bit of white. Let's pull a bit more purple in there. A little more white. That's a good color to start with. We'll see how that goes. Pay attention in your image to where your shadows are. So our shadow here does not go all the way up to the bottom of that book. The book is casting a little bit of a shadow, so take this almost right up to it. Leave a little speck of black. Okay, right around here, we're gonna start rounding the corner, and then light pressure, we're gonna dust, so we don't have a hard shadow there. I feel like this color is not quite purple enough. Let me just break up that line. Throw a little more purple into it, a little bit more white. It was a little on the black side. That's gonna be better, I think. Much better. Right up to the base of our candle there, and light pressure there. Right here, our light comes up to the foot of our hourglass, and then it's got a shadow underneath it. Soft line back there. I love this dusty purple with all those warm yellows. Such a nice contrast. Now we can come in and get a bit more black and start dusting out. Just blend it back and forth like that. Try not to make you dizzy with the plate in your face too much. I'm just picking up little bits of black. And then that light back and forth, kind of those lazy X's that we've talked about before. Blend with your finger if you need to. I just picked up a little of my purple mixture there because it wasn't blending real well. There we go. And a little hint of black because that line was stronger than I wanted. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do some very simple smoke. And I am going to underbind my paint, so I will need to spray varnish on this afterwards. I'm going to go to my number 5 round. And it's wet and probably has a little extra water in it. I'm going to get a tiny poke of white. Mix it in there with the water on my brush. Start right at the edge of my candle, right at the tip, and kind of spin my brush back and forth. Just get some kind of a shape. It doesn't really matter right now. I cleaned my brush off and it's just wet. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to start along one edge or the other. And I'm really going to kind of just flatten my brush, almost like I'm using watercolor. You can just kind of grab little bits of it, and remember that when it's underbound like that, it's going to dry much more transparent. So I just picked up a little bit of some thicker white, and I'm going to just add a couple spots that are going to be a little bit brighter. Just kind of nudge it. And if you feel like you just can't get the smoke to look the way you want it, just let it dry, paint over it later. So sometimes when I'm painting, I'm talking quite a bit and I'm not paying attention to small details. And then when I go back and edit, I see things that I wish I would have done different. So I am going to take advantage of one of those times and fix it. So I actually don't like this part of my skull's mouth. So I'm just going to touch it up real quick. I like to show you when I do these kinds of things because I think it helps to show you that, you know, that it's normal to want to go back and make changes. It's normal to see things after the fact. And it's okay to not get things right the first time. So I just took a little bit of that titanium white black mixture, just kind of a gray color right there in the middle. You can even just drag that highlight over a bit. Still do want a shadow there though, so I just have a darker version of that gray. Kind of a hard line right there, just like in the drawing, the tracing element. Man, my brain is shut off now. And I think I'm gonna widen out the base of the nose over here, and then I really am done. For reals this time. And I'm gonna sign it. And there is your creepy little still life. I hope you enjoyed painting this one as much as I did, and I hope that it helps get you in the mood for Halloween. You could certainly do this painting larger. Just make sure that when you print your tracing element that you scale it up a little bit so that it fits the canvas that you're wanting to paint it on. And a big thank you to my sponsor Frederick's Canvas, who provided the awesome little 6x6 canvas that I used in today's painting. And thank you everyone for always painting with me. I'll see you next time.